Of all the resources needed to build an economy that will sustain economic progress, none is more scarce than time. And that is one of the key messages of today's guest, Lester Brown, founder of both Worldwatch and Earth Policy Institute, and the author of Plan B 3.0, Mobilizing to Save Civilization. China now consumes more grain, meat, coal, and steel than the U.S. And if China's income grows as projected in 2031, its income per person will match incomes in the United States today. At that point, now get ready for this, it will be consuming the equivalent of 2/3 of the current world grain harvest, 2 times as much paper as the world now produces, and it will be driving 1.1 billion cars versus the 800 million in the entire world today, using 99 million barrels of oil per day, well above current world production of 84 million barrels. Impossible, you say? That might be the problem. Plan A, the Western fossil fuel-based, auto-centered, throwaway economic model, is not going to work for China or for India or for the 3 billion other people in developing countries, and that means it won't work for the world. It will not continue to work for anyone. And Brown says it's time for Plan B, a renewable, energy-based, reuse, recycle economy with a diversified transport system. It's time to build that new economy and that new world. The world is now spending, Lester, how many billion a year on military?
Worldwide, $1 trillion. $1
trillion. And what would it take to reach the social goals and Earth restoration goals of Plan B?
Less than $200 billion.
Less than $200 billion. And remember, a number that I'm going to mention a few times during this interview, we're spending $2 to $3 billion a week in Iraq. Military threats to national security pale besides the trends of environmental destruction and disruption. And a new factor, Lester Brown has done Plan B 2.0, Plan B 3.0. And in each one, there's little nuances of change, obviously. Some things get worse, some things get better. But the thing that is new in this one I really noticed is he starts talking about failed states. Okay? And that's failed states you usually hear about in terms of terrorism. But what Lester Brown has done is he said, it's true we have to save these states from failing and we have to restore these states from failing. But that makes global security actually not just a military and intelligence issue, but an issue of a holistic approach, and that's what Plan B is about. Lester Brown has been described by the Washington Post as one of the world's most influential thinkers. After working with the Department of Agriculture and International Agricultural Development, he helped establish the Overseas Development Council. Then he founded Worldwatch Institute, which has put out for years its annual State of the World report and its annual Vital Signs. In 2001, he left Worldwatch, founded Earth Policy Institute, and published Eco-Economy, Building an Economy for the Earth. He's written several other books, and as I said, we're dealing today with Plan B 3.0, Mobilizing to Save Civilization.
Very great to be here.
Okay, now I've asked you this before, but I'm going to ask you again because I like people to get a feel for the people that I'm talking to, not just the ideas. When you were involved in agriculture, and we're going back to the Kennedy administration?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. My question is, there was a time when no one thought about the environment, or maybe it was about conservation and, going off trekking now and then. And then it seemed to me environmentalism was usually about the local. This plant that's polluting this river or this forest that they're trying to cut down or that sort of thing. Yet you very early seemed to come to a global understanding of environmental issues. How did that happen?
I'm not really certain, but it probably was the result of, one, an agricultural background, two, a half year spent living in villages in India in 1956 where I could sort of see firsthand the food population problem beginning to unfold, and then training in the sciences. So I have some feel for how natural systems work and of the role of things like climate change, for example. I mean, if you're in agriculture, you have to be concerned with climate and weather, which is the product of the climatic system.
Okay, and so and while others were carving out this and that area, you founded Worldwatch. Was there almost anyone else looking at the global picture at that point? What year was that?
That was 1974, and that was fortunately the executive vice president of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund and I were both sensing by as early as 1973 the need for a research institute to focus on global environmental issues. There was none at the time, but it seemed clear to us that that's where we were going, where the world was headed. So the Rockefeller Brothers gave me a $500,000 startup grant to launch the Worldwatch Institute.
Okay, and those were, and I know you've left Worldwatch, but those Worldwatch State of the Worlds come out every January, and the Vital Signs also, I believe. And anybody, I mean, it's your old organization, but anybody who isn't aware of those two publications, they're definitely worth looking at. They're worth getting involved with that organization just so you can get those publications every year. That's worldwatch.org, right?
They're invaluable, and especially Vital Signs, which has the basic statistical trends in the world, everything from atmospheric CO2 levels to bicycle sales.
Right. So while the Worldwatch State of the World looks with narrative essays at problems around the world and some solutions, Vital Signs, as you say, is really the numbers of it all. What is it that has driven you to do Plan B? Plan B 2.0, Plan B 3.0, and then you can take that one right into what's new and different in 3.0.
Right. One of the goals of the Earth Policy Institute is to provide a vision of the kind of world we want, and then a sense of how we get from here to there. And so Plan B was the first version of this, and then after a couple of years I wanted to update it because a lot had happened, and we did Plan B 2.0, and now it's Plan B 3.0. And we've changed the subtitle from Rescuing a Planet Under Stress and a Civilization in Trouble to simply Mobilizing to Save Civilization. Whereas we used to think about saving the planet, and that's still essential. But what's really at stake now is civilization itself. And one of the things I have begun to realize in the last few years is that we have a growing backlog of unresolved problems in the world. Deforestation, collapsing fisheries, expanding deserts, falling water tables, eroding soils. I mean, you can go down the list. And the fallout from these problems is becoming more and more difficult to manage, especially for the developing country governments. We see a number of countries that have developed enough, for example, to bring down mortality, but not enough to bring down fertility. So they're sort of trapped in what demographers call the demographic trap with a rapid rate of population growth. And if you can't break out of that, then eventually you begin to break down. And if you look at the list of failing states, the top 20 on that list, 17 of them have rapid rates of population growth. These are the countries where most of the 70 million people added each year are being added, countries with falling water tables, eroding soils, and so forth. So the interesting question is, as this list of failing states grows longer each year, is how many failing states before we have a failing civilization? No one knows the answer to that. We haven't been there before. But on top of the traditional environmental problems, we now have new stresses like the prospect of peak oil and soaring oil prices, putting a lot of pressure on low and middle income countries in the world that import oil. And then suddenly, we, the United States, have added another major stress, which is we're converting a growing share of our grain supply into fuel for cars, and in the process, driving world grain prices to all-time highs. And this is creating instability in a lot of low and middle income countries that import grain. The risk is that the combination of rising oil prices and rising food prices will greatly increase the list of failing states. And I come back to this because of all the indicators that we track. Now, I think the key, the one that will reflect more than any other whether we're going to succeed or fail or not, is the number of failing states in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I find this an interesting move, and as you point out, it has to do with the subtitle, and it has to do with this reckoning of failed states. Let's talk first about, it seems to me what's sort of so frustrating and hits you right in the face is the inequities between the rich and the poor. We have for a long time realized that there was an inequity in money. And then, as this book and lots of folks reckon these days, it's only getting worse. But it really is that it isn't just an inequity in money, that what follows from that is inequity in health, inequity in education, inequity in all sorts of ways, in that the rich are not only getting economically richer while the poor get poorer, it's in every phase, isn't it?
In addition to health and education, it's opportunity. There's a vast opportunity gap. And for those who are born into societies where there just are very few opportunities, the level of frustration rises, and they become recruits for international terrorist groups, not necessarily jihadists, though many of them are, but for in Africa. I mean, there's a practice now of revolutionaries who want to overthrow governments of simply recruiting kids, basically, beginning 10, 12, 14 years old. Give them a gun and let them go. So we're faced with a widening gap, and this is becoming a threat to our security. As I look at the world today, I mean, terrorism is a problem, and it is a threat. But the big threats are the persistence of poverty, continuing population growth, climate change.
Well, let me break in for 1 second. I know in one of the earlier versions, you made a point, and I'm not going to quote it exactly, but it was basically, if all our attention to terrorism since 9/11 distracts us from these other issues, we will lose even bigger in a way. And it seems that this version, and it's not just a version, then it means reality, I think, has actually knit those problems together even more clearly. In other words, in that one you were dealing with it sort of as an either-or. And I think now you're saying it's not an either-or, they are inextricably linked.
No question. I mean, the interesting thing is that the budget that we lay out to deal with things like population growth, environmental degradation, spreading water shortages, climate change, etc., this is really the new security budget.
Exactly.
Because these are the real threats, and the climate change threat is enormous. And I mean, we look at ice melting, which is one of the consequences of a rising temperature on the planet. And in the past year, we've seen an almost nonstop series of stories and reports coming out. Ice is melting everywhere. I mean, I remember back in late August a report on that an area of Arctic sea ice, twice the size of Britain, had melted in 1 week. Scientists had never seen anything like this before. Or consider what's happening to Greenland. Greenland has an enormous ice sheet. It's a mile thick or more, covering almost that entire island, which is 3 times the size of Texas. But the rate at which it's melting now is extraordinary. And there's a large glacier on the west coast, which is kind of this glacier is where the ice sheet flows into the sea. It's called the Oluwasot Glacier. It is 3 miles wide. It's a mile deep. And this glacier is flowing at 2 meters an hour. Glaciers normally flow at 80, 100 meters per year. This is 2 meters an hour. And so periodically, as this glacier is flowing into the sea, large chunks break off, 3 miles wide, a mile high, several hundred football fields deep. And when they break off, they create a seismic response because these weigh billions of tons. And so when they break off, there's suddenly sort of a minor earthquake as the land responds to this sudden reduction in pressure. Glaciologists are dumbfounded by this. They've never seen anything like it before. But we now have to think about what happens if the ice sheet on Greenland melts in the decades or century or two ahead. And the answer is sea level rises 23 feet.
And before we go, what are the repercussions of sea level rising 23 feet? Let me go back to a couple of things. We've dealt with climate change, previously on the show, and certainly people have heard things, but there's a few things I think they might miss. One of them is that when we talk about global temperature rise, we're saying right now it's risen 1 degree?
About 1 degree Fahrenheit over the last several decades.
Okay, and we expect kind of best case scenario by 2050 or by 3,000? 3,000.
By the 2100.
Yeah, yes, 2100.
Yeah. By the end of this century, temperature could rise anywhere from 3 to 10 degrees, 11 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay, but if someone says, 1 degree, or someone says, maybe if we do something, by 2050, only 2 degrees, 2.5, 3 degrees, the fact is, at the poles, at the extremes, it's much greater than that.
Yes. We report global temperature changes at the global level. But as we look at global warming, we have to keep in mind that temperature over land rises faster than that over the oceans. The oceans are kind of an enormous temperature flywheel stabilizing. So temperature moves more over land. It moves more at high latitudes, that is toward the poles, than it does near the equator. And it rises more in the interior of continents than it does in coastal regions. So we see enormous melting.
Right. So I just want people don't get comforted by words like 1 degree or 2 degrees, because the difference in the Antarctica and the Arctic has already exceeded that, hasn't it?
Oh, yes. In parts of Alaska, northern Canada, Siberia, the areas around the Arctic Circle, including Greenland, temperatures have gone up in some cases 3 to 7 degrees already. And
my feeling is people never hear that. So while some of the other problems of climate change, like invasive species, insect-borne diseases traveling where they've been wiped out in the past, loss of various things that have to do with agriculture. The one about sea level, which depends on melting ice, is much further along and moving much faster than that would indicate, correct?
Yes. Looking at both Greenland and the West Antarctic ice sheet, and I mentioned the West Antarctic ice sheet, part of Antarctica, because that part of the ice sheet is not really on the continent itself. It's supported by a number of islands. And when it starts to go, it could break up very quickly. I think most scientists think it could go faster than Greenland. Greenland adds 23 feet if that were to melt entirely. The West Antarctic ice sheet adds 16 feet. So together...
Almost 40 feet.
Almost 40 feet.
What are the repercussions of a 20-foot or a 40-foot increase? And now let's again put that in context. We're talking about if Greenland melts, if the Arctic shelf melts, 30 years in the future? No
one knows. We realize now we know very little about ice melting. We've never been there before.
That's right.
The evolution of agriculture, of civilization itself, have all come since the last glacial period. So we've been living in a very nice interglacial era that's been very comfortable. Incidentally, the book is available online at Earth
for
Policy.
Free. Yes, I've been meaning to mention that. Earth Policy. And does it have a hyphen or not?
No.
No. earthpolicy.org is where you can learn so much more, because the entire book is available as a free download. I'm sorry I hadn't mentioned that earlier.
Okay, no problem. If Greenland were to go and the West Antarctic ice sheet, which is just a piece of the total Arctic ice cap, were to go, sea level would rise 39 feet. Many of the world's coastal cities would be underwater. This is not going to happen in years or decades, but it'll be spread out over, we hope, at least a century or two. But still, the rate at which it could go becomes alarming. Even a 1 meter rise in sea level would change a lot of things around the world, threaten a lot of cities. So we have a situation where if sea level were to rise 39 feet, there would be at least 600 million rising sea refugees. I mean, it's chaos.
600 million.
And long before they all had to move, I mean, imagine what happens to coastal real estate prices, for example, and what happens to the price of land in the interior of continents as vast populations are forced inland. Keep in mind that a large share of the world's population really lives, pretty close to the coast.
Just as is true in the U.S., is true around the world. Now, one of the other things that when people, again, I like these sort of counterintuitive things that you go, well, I hadn't thought of it that way. One of the things that you point out is when people talk nowadays about melting glaciers, they usually talk about Greenland and the Arctic. But what you point out is that the mountainous glaciers throughout the world are what allow us a steady supply of water. L.A. is absolutely vulnerable to this, correct? Speak to that.
Well, a lot of the snow and ice melt in the mountains in California provide the water supply for places like Los Angeles. The really big ones that are going, I mean, the mountain glaciers are melting everywhere. In the Alps, could be gone in half a century almost entirely, the Andes. But the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau are the ones that I'm really concerned about. All the major rivers in Asia originate in the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau. The Indus River, the Ganges, the Mekong, the Yangtze, the Yellow River.
So we're talking about India, China, Vietnam, a vast expanse which not only is vast in area but enormously vast in people.
Yes. These rivers, the Ganges, for example, during the dry season, when it's not raining, is fed by the ice melt from the Gangotri Glacier, Gangotri, a vast glacier. It is melting fast and could be gone entirely by mid-century. If that glacier goes, if we can't cut carbon emissions fast enough, if we can't close enough coal-fired power plants fast enough to save it, then the Ganges will become a seasonal river, flowing during the rainy season but not during the dry season. I mean, imagine the consequences of that. Or think about the Yellow and Yangtze rivers. These are the rivers that irrigate the wheat and rice fields of Asia.
I mean, the three largest grain-producing countries, if I'm not mistaken, are the U.S., China, and India, not necessarily in that order. And all those two definitely are susceptible to this, and the U.S. is as well.
Right. The U.S. to a much lesser degree because irrigated agriculture is
not as large a portion of what we're doing.
Right.
But so people think about that. In other words, these effects, these ripples, these repercussions are, I think they just don't get, they don't get realized as we go along. I'm going to give you one more minute of the bad news. In part 2, which will air actually not until after the fund drive, we will start dealing with the solutions.
The interesting thing about the melting of the glaciers in the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau is that the two countries most affected by this will be India and China, which happen to be the two countries now building most of the world's coal-fired power plants. And I don't think the scientific community and the political community in these countries have connected yet to help the political leaders understand what this is all about.
Right. In other words, they're going to be putting up more and more greenhouse gases at a time when their very survival is dependent on cutting them back.
Exactly.
Okay. The new book is Plan B 3.0, Mobilizing to Save Civilization. The website is earthpolicy, one word, .org, where you can download the entire book free of charge. That's environmentally sound. Information without paper. Thank you. Thank you.